Follow up to the last recording on liberalism as individualism, liberalism as rationalism. Um, so, rationalism is a wide ranging term, but the origin of the term as an ism is uh, with um, Protestantism. It goes with Protestantism. So, although it's credited especially to Descartes, but the basic issue is that the whole apparatus of logic and conceptual reasoning is thrown off, which is imposed through the Aristotelian Thomistic synthesis, and which had, in addition, played a strong role in Judaism, of course, through the Rambam, through Maimonides, and also in the Islamic tradition. So when this logical, um, basically set of rules, which has in our own time been taken over and is um, very violently misused constantly by the often by atheists, or the most proud of this possession of pure concepts without substance, let's say. Um, when this is thrown off, the alternative to it is this supposed sort of, in a way, it's like what's taken over America in the legal doctrine. This constant talk of the plain language that can be understood in its immediacy, which always gets us into us in swamped in this difficulty that in America, because the Constitution's lodged is more than 200 years old. So then we have to go back to the language as it was at the time of the founding, and then it's not exactly the same, and nobody knows, and it's intermixed with all kinds of legal terms of art, and then you have to make construals, interpretations, and so on, and language drifts constantly, um, so that this question of the rationalism ends up being this question of sort of supposedly ordinary speech that anyone can understand so long as they stick with it long enough. Something like that in Descartes. But I'd say the stronger statement of it is, which goes directly with individualism, would be to say that after Luther, not maybe through Luther himself, but through the way he became widely understood, everyone is their own pope. So there's no pope who can say, here's the text, and here's the interpretation of the text, and here's the proper methods of exegesis, and here's the ways things are done, and here's the rules. And if you don't know them, you're ignorant, and we won't listen to you. We'll regard you as a case of an undomesticated and more like an animal than like a human being, let's say. They have a different way. So the older way of looking at this kind of issue of who's the outsiders was to be more like they're less human, they're more animal. Whereas for us, it's always they're less normal, they're more mentally ill. Whether that amount, I won't say that amounts to the same thing. I'll just say those our regime, our way of excluding, has displaced the older way. But the individual way would then be to disregard in both those poles in a way. So everyone's a human being. There's no animal and more human. We're all too human. And the same thing with the Now, try to impose that today in any real serious circumstance where you're dealing with law enforcement or where you're dealing with legal apparatus or job interview or so on. Everyone is mentally normal. Nobody is, um, because to be human is to be somehow simply to be what you are. Everyone's different, but it's just there's just differences in differences. The anthropological principle. Of course, Dugan would say to that, as a caveat, Dugan would say to that um, every people has always recognized the difference between the pathological cases and the sane cases, and the pathological cases and the extraordinary cases, shaman or witch doctors or whatever it may be, in that, or those who open up the transcendence, for instance, as opposed to the merely mentally ill. I'd say, in a way, almost every culture except depression, which I think I have the most, I coordinate myself with quite a bit. Because if you begin the Prussian order with the figure who sort of straddles both the liberal order, the liberal bourgeois order, and the militarist Bismarckian order, Goethe as the opening of the Prussian moment, and then you go sort of to, I suppose, Heidegger as both the end of philosophy, which I see sort of from Socrates saying, I know that I don't know, but interjecting various things where he really claimed dogmatically to know, such as that justice is what makes the citizens better, and other is doctrine of remembrance and so forth, to Heidegger, who really says, I know that I don't know, and the only thing he claims to know would be the letting be. So I know that I don't know, but I just let that be and see what can come of investigations of the letting be. That's how I see the beginning and end of the borders of philosophy here. But so is that an individualist position? I would say no, because it's at least from one angle. From the angle of Dasein is different from an analysis of the metaphysical subject, from which the notion of the individual having their own stance on the good, the beautiful, and the true comes in. And then various questions come in about whether concepts represent actual genuses, like the so-called, or whether they're the hypostasized substances, such that they act as if they'll always be, let's say, trees, for instance, and they'll always be doing certain character. They have, let's say, trees have instincts, and by those instincts we can observe what they're like, but they evolve, and trees are something changing, so you can't say they're a permanent stock in nature in the mind of God anymore. But this is regulative principle for understanding what they are in some sense, so far as it's held still. Um, like, for example, if it were to be viewed that war is something simply bad, then you can no longer say that there's generally an art of knowledge of war, because that wouldn't really be knowledge anymore. The hypothesized substance of war would have changed so much that it would no longer be the same matter we were talking about somehow. Maybe it'd have skill in, I don't know, defense rather than war. I don't know. But if the idea changes sufficiently and we're talking about something that's in the world, then you get into this evolutionary principle, which somehow goes with the civilian state and individualism, and the principle of the natural right as being whatever is the expression of the people, or held to be essential by the people at a given time. So if we had, it would be useful if we could have some discussion back and forth in the YouTube comments so that we can bring out specific points and try to bring more candor to them instead of only sort of peregrinations here and there. Because I'm not certain what points need to be brought to greater sharpness and clarified um, in a way either for myself or for anyone else. And I do think the Socratic discussion with the principle of letting be, as it were, which wouldn't really be a principle exactly, rather than dialectic, might be a good path.